Hello, and welcome to another Northstar Talks Politics. Today I'm talking about handshake activism, revolutionary change, and the climate crisis. Now, first of all, this talk was inspired partly by watching a video by Kumi Naidoo, he's South African, and Luisa Neubauer, she's German, although she is a fellow at the Harvard CES John F. Kennedy Fellow, so she may actually be in and out of the United States, but she's a German citizen. Um, what's going on with Trump attacking foreign residents? I wouldn't be surprised even if she's been in the U.S. if she's thinking of getting out or is currently out and not going to re-enter. We'll see what's going on with those things as more and more activists get silenced by a brutal authoritarian government crackdown on dissent. Um, on the Sustainable Hour, June 17th, 2022. Now, it's a long video. I encourage you to watch if you can, but if you don't have over an hour, um, I suppose hopefully you'll get a little of what they talked about here. And besides, I want to take things one step further. One of the key things they talk about in the first 20 minutes of the video is what's known as 20 minutes. Let me double check that. uh, 10 minutes actually, 15. It winds down to 20. They talk about handshake activism. Um, Lisa describes it very well, noting it accomplishes nothing. It's something you do, you don't miss out on many other things. She talks about trying to get meetings with a minister being very, very important. In this kind of activism, it's the kind of thing where you go on a TED talk and you shake someone's hand and, uh, you know, photo shoots, and she quite literally went on a TED talk, by the way, during that period in her life. Or maybe she was already transitioning out of doing handshake activism by that point. I'm not sure, but I know she qualified the TED talk she did as part of that. But it's that's what came to mind when I heard the phrase for sure and the way she was describing it. It's a type of activism that advances your career. She even says, this is a direct quote, it works out very well. You get reward for this. It fits the system. It's something that is even considered working on your career. Lisa Neubauer says that she abandoned this after meeting Greta Thunberg in Poland at a conference, and Greta Thunberg being the only person in the room who was treating climate change like the thing it really is, a crisis, a emergency that you can't just sit and talk and look for very gradual change on. We're running out of time. Um, excuse me. Sorry, a little gas. I'd take it a little further in that it's something people who do it, they get promoted into the upper class. They're offered money, opportunities so that they get focused on their career, so that they feel invested, become complacent. This can't be done to everyone, obviously, but the leading voices of movements that the government is trying to co-opt. And often these opportunities you'll see, I think the John F. Kennedy Fellowship at Harvard is an example of that, whether or not Lisa knows that. I mean, Harvard is very connected to government interests, and at least the interests of a certain kind of center right, center left Democratic Party. So, I mean, in the US, people call it center left, but it's really more center right in the global perspective. Politics that just does very gradual change of change at all. And, co opted Black Lives Matter, co opted Occupy Wall Street to the best of its ability, has co opted the climate movement to the best of its ability. So, um, yeah, Harvard is an aspect of that. But, you know, if it doesn't always work, and maybe she's using the money to be able to actually go out and speak, which I've always wondered how activists are able to pay the bills. I know after grad school and stuff, I was stuck in Aurora. I was struggling just to, have money to eat. I don't know how I could have gone and flown around the world and spoke at these conferences. So stuff like fellowships, opportunities like that. And sometimes universities may do it because it enhances their prestige, and sometimes nonprofits. Um, but the thing is, at the same time, that it's necessary sometimes for this activism to occur in a capitalist air quote democratic context like we have in neoliberal system, it's often an attempt to co-opt and promote people into the upper ruling class so that a few of the most charismatic, powerful voices, so that they will shut up or become less dangerous to the elites. Um, Kumi says something this about handshake activism. Many of those meetings were completely ritualistic, meaning when I went to the meeting, I knew what they were going to tell me at the end of the meeting. They knew what I'm going to tell them in the meeting. And then it was theatrics and a box ticking exercise. Uh, and I think that describes handshake activism pretty well. But as Kumi says, there's no time to tell lies and claim easy victories. Now it's time for absolute brute truth. Um, and I think it's worth noting people had been doing this handshake activism for a long time. Kumi talks about he did it for 4 decades, tried to work within the system. Luisa is quite a bit younger. She's actually, I think, 29 now, younger than me. So with these two lovely, beautiful human beings, and I'm not gonna pretend I'm not a little bit enamored of Luisa. It's a shame I don't have people like that in my life. Instead, I've been surrounded by pretty shitty people, and I mean, partly pre-meds when my age. Cool people like that. Maybe I would have had more friends and romance and actually connections and could have networked and gotten involved in activism instead of surrounded by people who only thought of themselves. Like even people are trying to become physicians. I'm like, aren't you going to do any activism? Don't you care about like these healthcare inequalities? No, no, they didn't. So I wish I had someone like that in my life back when before long COVID when I was healthy. Um, And, Kumi is a bit older, but I suppose I could have seen more as a mentor figure if I met him at the right time. People like this, though, you can draw some wisdom for what they said. They've been there, they've seen that, and they're clearly not selling out when they sit there and talk about handshake activism. One of Kumi's childhood friends was in fact killed by the South African apartheid government. He says it was a group of, he misspeaks, says four, and he corrects himself, says 8 activists who were murdered by the police for their activism. At the very beginning of the talk, he talked about how they started with a protest where they were chanting, "We want equality," and people in the back misheard it and were chanting, "We want color TVs," because he says it's a very thick accent. The words sound similar when he says it. It's a South African accent thing, but he's pointing out they weren't that dangerous, and then some of them got murdered despite that. He talks about the government repression backfired and turned them into radicals when they probably would have just gone home after otherwise. They were expelled from the university by the government, um, engaging in censorship, which is what's occurring with like the Gaza protests now. I mean, a lot of these people might have just gone back to their lives, but now they're like getting expelled, getting their lives destroyed. They're going to become lifelong activists, a lot of them, and dedicated to radical change. And this I guess goes to what was I believe it was Karl Marx who said this. It might have been Lenin. The last capitalist will be the one who sells us the rope to hang him with. um, the system sows the seeds of its own demise, and um, in violent repression to try and maintain control of the rich, and sometimes stuff like fellowships to try and co-opt the leaders. At the same time, it's trying to maintain control. The system actually sows its own destruction, and that's good because this brings me to the other point here. Guess I can minimize this. That said what was in there. You're not going to achieve the kind of change. I think Kumi, and this was over 2 years ago, talks about how we have. It'll be 3 years and 2 months. So that 34 months ago, we talked about how we have 10 years to turn things around. And, he's pretty clear that it's not happening fast enough. But here's the thing. You're not going to achieve that within the system. You cannot. There's some excellent writing on this. Of all people, Lenin said before the Russian Revolution about the limits of reform. There's a Socialism for All video. I can link it to you guys if you're curious. This guy does audiobooks, and this is an audiobook of something Lenin wrote in like 1922, just before the, or actually, no, that book was during the Russian Civil War, before the formation of the Soviet Union, but just before. Um, and there were other books. He's done a number of these. He was quoting earlier books from before the revolution. That's right. But he does these audiobooks, but sometimes he'll relate something to a quote from an earlier book by the same author. Kind of like a Cliff Notes context while doing, just the full text of the book. I kind of think it's a cool way to present stuff, especially for someone like long COVID. It's hard for me to go and get my hands on these books. I don't have money to really buy them, and um, harder for me to sit and stare at text for a long time. So audiobooks help with my disability. But there are limits to reform. The system will pretend you can push it further, but it's not. It will bend and bend and it will just stop. Ultimately, the system has to break. You have to have, if you want to save the planet, if you want to save billions of people dying from climate collapse, you have to have revolution. Absolutely have to have it. Mass uprisings, people have to overthrow the governments. I'm not necessarily talking violent revolution. I do not support violent revolution. Um, it partly, I mean, I'll say that if I said anything otherwise, YouTube would censor me. But even if that wasn't the case, it would still be the fact that I think sometimes you can have mass nonviolent protest, strikes, million man marches, kind of things, and you can overthrow a government. But I'm not talking like the U.S. Civil Rights Act. I'm talking like people grinding the system to a halt and demanding a new constitution in the United States, for instance. You cannot achieve what needs to be done within the bounds of the existing constitution. It must be replaced. The whole system must be completely torn up. None of this Trump's drain the swamp shit. No, a literal new constitutional convention, which in the U.S. you'd have to forbid any moneyed interests from. You'd have to have very strict rules to keep them from just rewriting to their interests. And it's possible this could result in government repression, and the people who do it may, if they're getting murdered, have to result to violence. I'm not gonna suggest that people go to this, but governments can mass murder people and force people's hands sometimes. But peaceful change, if the government is smart enough to realize they'll just get violence in their hands, peaceful change is the preferred method and the method that can work as long as the government doesn't start literally using death squads to kill anyone who enforce labor camps and these kind of things. And even a certain amount of violent repression can be dealt with. I'm thinking of South Africa, Apartheid South Africa, Nelson Mandela, who, by the way, had to be taught out of violent revolution and said that basically it can work at times. He actually worked with the Communist Party in South Africa and formed alliance with them. And this is the other thing you need. Uh, Environmentalists need to get out. They need to increase numbers. They need to have more public support than they do, and they need alliances, such as with socialists. I am an environmental socialist myself, an eco-socialist. And be clear, capitalism will never allow us to do what we need to do, and you can never have socialism will say the current U.S. Constitution, private property is too much protected in it. You need to literally hold a new constitutional convention, have new rules about things like property rights that allow you to go after the oil companies, the fossil fuel companies that are killing our planet. Allow nationalization of key industries like transportation, um, like tire production, like automobile industry, like steel and concrete, because these are huge contributors to CO2, and they directly produce it through using coal. Sometimes in the production of steel, aluminum, concrete, all often directly use coal in their production. So even if you aren't burning it for electricity, and even if you're not burning oil, you still have to deal with those industries. And more gradual change is no longer possible, even if it would be less economically and politically disruptive. Even if you had all the time in the world, you get a better outcome from gradual reform to these industries. There's no time left for that. If we don't want a really horrible outcome, we have to nationalize these industries, and we have to force rapid change, even if it hurts the economy. And this is why other reason the socialism's aspect has to come in, because ordinary people are not going to struggling to survive except something that makes them poor. Socialism takes the pie and distributes it more evenly. if the pie is distributed more evenly, it doesn't matter if it's smaller, if ordinary people get a bigger piece than they did before. The people who pay the price are the rich, are the billionaires, are the high bourgeoisie in Marxist terms, the billionaire class, the Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos types, and a small sliver of the population that has enjoyed a very privileged position at the top in exchange for helping prop up the power of these billionaires. So, the top 10%, they're probably going to make less money because they often are paid more than what their labor and their skills are really worth in order to create a group that's loyal to the system, in order create workers who will oppress their fellow workers in supervisory roles. Um, I mean, that's the kind of the whole thing. Uh, if you have a privately owned business, if you have a sole proprietorship, and these days much of capitalism is corporations. First joint stock corporation was founded in the 1500s, but the mid 1500s at that was the early. It was not even the end of that century. So um, corporations have been around a long time, but they've increasingly replaced privately owned companies. But whether it's a sole proprietorship or corporation, sole proprietorship is just easier to understand. You have an owner at the top, and he knows he can't just treat all his workers like shit. So he gets a handful of workers, he makes them supervisors, management, middle management, and he pays them somewhat better in order for them to press their fellow workers. And then the workers are angry at the middle management instead of the boss. And this is how the larger system of an entire country works too. There's a segment of the population that's given privileged positions. For instance, the healthcare system, it's very often physicians, which is why I read so many greedy psychopaths when I was a pre-med who just they wanted money because they know that doctors have this privileged position and they step on the throats of nurses and medical assistants and PAs. And yeah, they may not always see it as that way. They don't see it as step on the throats of these people, but they make it harder, make it impossible for the nurses to get together and strike and demand better wages and working conditions. They sexually harass the nurses. Doctors do that kind of thing way too often. They start private practices and become small business owners themselves, petty bourgeoisie in Marxist analysis, where like small businesses can be a clinic outside of a hospital. It can also sometimes even be doctors who work primarily in a hospital, and they'll technically incorporate like these small little mini companies, basically mini corporations that are just them. Very often, maybe one or two other doctors, and then they'll contract their work out to the hospital they work for, so they can demand higher pay. And what do they do when they're doing this? Well, in order to get away with charging as higher pay, their interests start to align towards screwing over the people who actually do a lot of the work in the hospital besides them. I mean, doctors, petty bourgeoisie, so they work, and if they, I mean, not all, but the ones who own these private practices, they work, but they also own capital. Obviously, the doctors help make a hospital run, but they also need nurses and a lot of other staff, going down the way down, the security guards and janitors. They all are necessary to keep a hospital functioning. Let me tell you, the security guards. When I was in EMT, I delivered a lot of patients to hospitals, and sometimes we get really unruly, dangerous ones, and security guards are absolutely necessary to keep a hospital's ER functioning. Um, the nurses are the ones who do a lot of the grunt work. Medical assistants get paid very, very poorly because they're in this hierarchy, they're below the nurses. So each group steps in the group below them. The doctors step on the nurses, and the nurses turn around and step on the medical assistants. Um, you're not gonna you're not gonna achieve the change that's needed in a system like this. Hierarchical control at the very top of a handful of billionaires. You have to have revolution. You have to have an end to capitalism. And if you're going to make that appealing to ordinary people, you have to promise people a bigger share of the pie and a bigger slice. People are struggling to survive at the same time. So you need environmental socialism. You need, even if the future economic growth is slower and the billionaires get taxed higher, well, I mean, you'd seize their assets, I guess, eventually, but at first you might. Len talks about this. You can't just instantly do everything revolutionary just because you have a revolution. Um, and he was talking about how the Soviet Union was gradually nationalizing industries and such. You may start by taxing billionaires very highly, but with a plan that's already in place to nationalize their assets. And like, we're not talking, oh, maybe we'll do it someday. We're talking like an actual concrete plan. Um, Sweden had a plan to gradually nationalize its industries that they uh, considered putting into action. They didn't activate this plan, if you will, but they considered it, and they end up doing this stupid thing where companies had to sell 8% of their stock to the government, which is nothing. But it was a gradual plan. It's a great example of sometimes a thing, sort of thing I'm talking about, except Sweden is an example also of the failures of democratic socialism, of more reformist approaches. It may have, whereas say if you had a more revolutionary change, then their plan wouldn't have ended up in this silly half measure. I am a democratic socialist. I suggest um, trying to push for more reformist changes along the way, but that's a byproduct of the ultimate demand for a peaceful revolution, for a complete reform of government, because you're not for an end to capitalism, because you're not going to achieve what needs to be done. And billions are going to die. And people they want to take no responsibility for this. They want to say, oh, that just happened, or there was no way around it. There is a way around it. The way around it is radical change. It's drastic action. It's getting out and evangelizing. It's funny. I just watched a thing. There was a German evangelical Christian, and in America, you used to see them all be right wing, but this guy was very left wing about the climate. He was talking about greed and the destruction of our planet that God gave to us and such. But you kind of have to copy some of that very, we're not going to give up, we're going to push, we're going to talk to everyone about this issue. And in the end, um, socialists may need to arm themselves, environmentalists need to arm themselves. They should try for peaceful change, but their hand might be forced. I hope to God not. You cannot blame people if they try to stop themselves from being murdered, if it comes down to it. Um, but people need to be organized. They need to be prepared to be repressed, and they need, and as much as possible, try and first to, as I said, you can take a certain amount of violence and go on Gandhi, just let yourself get being. It becomes a point is the violence severe enough that you're at threat of being mass murdered and your movement ceases to exist because everyone's dead. Like the Indonesian genocide is a great example of that. In the Indonesian genocide, the government came and killed every communist, socialist, trade unions they could find. The people had every right to do a violent civil war and overthrow the government at that point because they were being killed. Over 1 million of them were mass murdered. Uh, on the other hand, 100 people killed here, 1,000 there. It's bad, but people have stood and let themselves get beaten and attacked before, in doing protests, even the civil rights era in America. So again, use common sense. I'm not going to tell people every little thing, but I trust in the common sense of human beings and ordinary people who are pushing for the right change. But I tell you, you will not get the change you need unless you're willing to completely uproot the system. I reach out to environmentalists, to people who are climate activists, work together with socialists. You will never achieve your goals without an alliance with the socialists. You don't have the numbers, and you will not be able to convince enough people that this isn't going to make them poor and isn't going to make them suffer. People are going to have trouble thinking past their short-term interests unless you compare it with something like a socialist agenda. And I'm not talking Green New Deal, oh, we don't just create jobs. I mean, literally, we're going to nationalize industries. We're going to give you a universal basic income to make sure that you can still buy eggs and get to work each day. And if we take your car, we're going to build a huge mass transit system and government subsidized taxis. We're going to do whatever we can to make sure that you can still meet your needs at the same time as we uh, save the planet from otherwise billions dead. And we're in the middle of a mass extinction crisis right now. Species are going extinct by the thousands. It's the um, biggest mass extinction that's occurred any time in recent geological history. Like, recent is the key word. I remember studying this even in college. We were already, and that was a number of years ago, more than a decade now, when they were teaching us about this. I studied biology. I was trying to become a physician. You have to do some amount of ecology and that, and I'll tell you, this is not looking good for the planet. We've known for a while that this is a existential threat. And if you thought it was right to go and fight the Nazis in World War II, this is going to be much worse than anything the Nazis did. This is going to kill hundreds of times more people, and it's going to be pursued with an equally cold-eyed evil by the very people at the very top. They may hide it better, but they care just as little as Hitler cared about killing 6 million Jews. If they kill 100 million, 200, 400, 600 million people in Africa and Asia and Latin America and even parts of North America and Europe starving to death because of climate change, because of mass uh, climate catastrophe, droughts all over the place, extreme weather events, food production is going to plummet. People are going to be dropping like flies if the way we are headed, if this continues, if we don't have drastic change. And that's something that's worth fighting to prevent. That's something that's worth getting out, protesting, organizing, um, for people being prepared, being armed for in case they have to defend themselves, and demanding new constitutions, demand end to capitalism. And environmentalists, I don't care if you don't like socialists, you will not stop this unless you work with socialists. And socialists, I know you may not like some of the environmentalists, but you need their numbers. So too many people become disillusioned with socialism. They think the Soviet Union fell and therefore socialism is over. That's bullshit, but you need the numbers. You need them now because the technology of mass surveillance of AI is getting to the point where socialist revolution will not be possible in the future. I know you think a lot of you Marxist Leninists are the worst about this. They go on about how the change to socialism is inevitable and revolution will happen someday. Yeah, if you had a system that didn't change and all the time in the world, but no matter how bad the contradictions become, it's not going to matter if humanity either goes extinct first or AI and killer death robots and these kind of things get to the point where revolution becomes impossible. Then no matter how many people want it, it will fail. You have a limited window of time. You need to work with environmentalists. And I'm sure most socialists I've heard and talked to, they understand that a socialist government would be much more sensitive to environmental issues, that it's not going to put profit before human lives. So there's already a natural alignment here. You just need to make it more clear. You need to talk. You need to get into dialogues. And the government will do everything you can to stop this, to keep you atomized, to keep you from being able to get out and get involved, to keep you poor and oppressed. I mean, but maybe that sort of works on me. I'm disabled. I don't have much energy to go anywhere. I'm not able to work and have, you know, transportation. The car I have goes to families so they can get to work, without which they wouldn't be able to work, which they wouldn't have housing. I'm really flexible on COVID, but I've also there have been periods in my life where I just worked minimum wage. I can tell you, I could do these things even when I worked minimum wage. If I'd realized how desperate the situation is when I was working minimum wage and just above minimum wage jobs, I worked better jobs later, like an EMT, which doesn't get paid great, but it's better than minimum wage. It's possible to balance even a minimum wage job if you're willing to make sacrifices. If you own a house, you may need to sell and downsize because people get house poor. If you think you start a family, put it off because I know these things hurt, but you're not going to have a future under capitalism with the way things are going. You're not going to have a future with the destruction of the planet, and you're not going to have a future with mass unemployment due to AI, with economic collapses get worse every time. Every 4 to 7 years there's an economic crash. This has been going on like clockwork for over 100 years, and they just keep getting worse. And each time the recovery starts with a higher level of government debt. This cannot go on forever. Eventually, governments are not going to be able to spend their way through recoveries. The income inequality just gets worse every time. It's going to get to the point where we're going to end up with what some people have called neo-feudalism. You will not have a future if you sit lazily on your ass. So get out and act. I know this is hard, but I'm doing this. I'm risking my life with this with this YouTube stuff, because one of these days I know that there's going to be some gang right wing thugs are going to come and try and beat me up, kill me, abduct me, bring me to a forced labor camp. This is the way the U.S. is going, and I may not be able to get out because I don't have a source of income other than little help from government, which they may cut off for political reasons, or because this increasing level of austerity in America with welfare systems being cut thanks to like Trump. Um, and if I can get my YouTube channel to where it makes enough ad money, then I doubt I can like I'd like to go to Sweden. I'd like to leave the United States. But I can't do that unless I have a source of money. So I'm risking my life here. You can take some chances yourself. Take some discomfort on. I'll admit I may not have a ton to lose with how I'm disabled and suffering here, but that the hope springs eternal, and it's not like I'm not hoping things get better to be a cure. I would have made immense sacrifices when I was healthy too, if I'd realized how the bad things were going to get. Fortunately, I didn't realize the pandemic was happening, and the pandemic kept everyone isolated from each other, at least me, with respecting, social distancing and bubbles and, not getting out in the world as much to try and avoid getting COVID or spreading it. And indeed, I got COVID anyways from my roommate not taking the same precautions I did, and it's not like I had a choice. What he of living there, of having a roommate in the city I was living. It's impossible to have a solo apartment. It's not affordable. I only had one roommate to keep my risk low, and this guy took unnecessary risk, got me infected with COVID, and I became disabled. But if I didn't become a socialist, if I hadn't seen the writing on the wall when I was in the middle of the pandemic, if it had been earlier, I would have been out doing what these activists doing, getting probably my future destroyed, because I doubt I would have gotten to special masters if I did, if I'd been arrested in protests, even for peaceful, non-violent, just uh, people in power try very much to reward handshake activism and to punish those who actually um, who are either ordinary rank and file go to protests, because it's rarely the leaders get you know attacked this way, and if they do, they have enough fame to make up for it, that they can still get opportunities, because there's also pictures of them shaking some minister's hand as well as their arrest record. Or anyways, this is not at this point contribute much. So folks, get out at environmentalists find socialists, socialists find environmentalists. You need to work together. You need to change the world, and you need to put an end to capitalism before it puts an end to billions, with a B, billions of people, hundreds of millions, a year for, or at least every couple. Like, let's say it's 100 million people every 2 years for a 50-year time period. Do the math. That's that's for a 50-year time period. That's like 2.5 billion, right? If I did that correctly, that's the kind of death tolls we're talking from climate collapse at a minimum. So you must take action, or the future will blame you, and they will be right to do so, to curse your name. Uh, anyways, I wish you all the best. Take care of each other. Be kind to yourselves, and may always find a guiding star to lead you home. Until next time, this is Northstar. Adieu, and best luck.